Welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, so here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Kyra Bobinet. Kyra, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
Awesome. So Kyra is the CEO and founder of Fresh Try, a cutting-edge neuroscience-based health behavior change platform developed with and for Walmart associates. She's an award-winning public health physician that specializes in healthcare innovation, technology-enabled behavior change, behavior neuroscience, health disparities, and population health management. With an MD from UCSF and an MPH from Harvard, Dr. Bobinet is also an adjunct professor at Stanford School of Medicine and Dr. BJ Fogg's Behavior Design Lab. Dr. Bobinet's best-selling book, Well-Designed Life, has been called a must-have tool for health innovators worldwide. Dr. Bobinet, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So not too shabby in the bio department, in the biography department. Before we get going here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yeah. So my body was born in Iowa City, Iowa. I am a mixed race between Bohemian Czech, and my mom is a Ojibwe, Minnesota Ojibwe. So that area of the country, And then we bounced around to LA to DC. And then in my formative years, I was in Oklahoma riding a horse barefoot. So that's kind of how I finished out my childhood.
Very interesting. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say my body was born. I mean, that's very interesting. And it's obviously it's a conscious choice, but say more about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, as I get on with understanding this world and appreciating how illusory my brain is, I try to do little things to de-identify with the ego or egoic kind of structures. And so that might be my sort of natural way of just appreciating the physicality that happened, but also realizing that this whole journey is just a whole lot else.
I appreciate that. All right. So you've got a lot going on here. I want to say, how did all this start? But yeah, how did you get into this field, this interest, obviously it's a passion and a mission for you?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, probably growing up with really messed up parents was part of it. I'm sure a lot of the listeners here can relate that, my mom had PTSD from Indian boarding school and also, sexual abuse and physical abuse in the foster care system for her childhood. And then my dad was, sort of undiagnosed, just had rage issues and would smash his hand through tables. And, so while he wasn't an alcoholic, I would say he might be, akin to like a dry alcoholic and somebody who just had no control over his emotions. And so a child like that, I became much more interested in psychology. When I went to medical school, my pretense was to be a cancer researcher, but then I kind of fell in love with psychiatry, but not the field of psychiatry as it was being practiced, but, PTSD, for example, at the VA, medical center where I did my psychiatry rotations, and I did a fellowship after that with at-risk youth. I started a program for at-risk youth coming back from prison. These were like chronic violent offender youth. So I think I always had a penchant for, how do people change and why don't they, even if they want to?
I appreciate you sharing that, but what an intense cauldron to be raised in. I mean, come on, it's here. Your mother and her background, very intense, devastating. Your father had his own issues, and yet, look, not everyone who's brought up in that environment goes on to do what you've done, there's an intensity there. There's a passion there. Talk to me a little bit about what was going on for you such that you're like, okay, how did you even get to the point where you're able to succeed
Yeah.
to the degree that you did?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, I was, as I was writing the book, the chapter on trauma and those kinds of things with the brain science that we're going to talk about, I was curious. I just did my ACE score for the first time, and I scored a 7, which is pretty good in terms of heft and risk and burden. I think that just my noticing coming to this world, I think that I just had a noticing metacognitive state that was very solid. And I also think that I had a really intense sense of compassion, and it first was with animals and bugs and nature. Nature kind of raised me. And then I issued that to my parents, and I think my own pain, my own suffering, I was definitely depressed in junior high, high school for sure, and into college. I remember just being kind of catatonic on my bed, unable to go to school. I was all dressed and backpack and everything, and I just couldn't move, and so that got me curious as to, what is this? How can I cure myself? How can I heal myself? And I think by just following that thread, I got interested in, oh, wait, this is happening to everybody else too. We all know what to do, but we won't do it. And that was super, like from a scientific perspective, that just kind of grabbed my attention. And I've been doing it for 30 years now.
So let's talk about that. How did that unfold? And what did it unfold to and into?
So, to me, there's been, various hints and clues along the path. And then that kind of built a puzzle that came into more fulsome, fidelity and focus. And so I would say it's a moments. My mom, of course, PTSD, being raised by a PTSD parent is a whole experience unto itself. Lots of suicidality, lots of erratic emotional landscapes. And then, of course, I just wanted to rise above it and be a scientist and kind of push all that emotional stuff away. Went to medical school and immediately started volunteering with at-risk youth, incarcerated youth. My dad had been to prison, in federal prison, when I was in college on embezzlement charges. So just a lot of just disruption in my family. And I think that I just got really curious about, these youth would say, they would swear up and down when they were in juvenile hall, I want to change. I don't want to run the streets anymore. I don't want to be in a gang anymore. And I believed them. I might've been a sucker, but I believed them. I was like, this kid really wants to change. And the second they get out, the day they get out, I'm at their court date. I'm super excited to work with them, get them plugged into school, that kind of thing. And they ditch me. And not only do they ditch me, I go to their house to knock on the door at the agreed upon time. And they were hiding below the windows, to avoid me. And I'm like, what is this? This person who I was a whole other person is now a whole other person. I'm seeing this other side of them that doesn't want to go to school, that doesn't want to be a good, citizen, that wants to go run with his boys. The second I leave, he's going to have his boys come by and pick him up. And so that kind of discrepancy. And I saw it in my patients too. Patients would, yeah, doc, I'll take my meds, or I'll test my blood sugar, or I'll eat healthy and exercise. And then I either wouldn't hear from them again, or they would come back and they were just all, head hung low and shameful, about themselves because they had failed at the thing that they had promised to do, that we had agreed upon, that was so, feasible and so small and just even a small step. So I got super curious why people just were not able to show up for themselves.
So, I think a lot of us might think, well, some of those people are clearly, maybe they're lying and they don't want to change, but a lot of them probably do. Right. So what's going on?
So to me, the big sort of aha was finding the neuroscience that underpinned this, because forever we've known I don't like the term learned helplessness, but there's a tremendous amount of knowledge in, animals and humans not acting in our own best interest, and the way that trauma and depression, those kinds of states, and addiction, really set that up. And so, or does it precede and then, are they a handshake? So I was always curious about learned helplessness, this kind of stasis, this stuckness that was going on. And for me, the big aha was in my first book. I was just doing research on motivation, And I looked at the neuroscience behind motivation. And there was this very, very early study or two around how the habenula, which is a new area I'd never heard of, it's like 0.5 centimeter in your thalamus, super, super tiny area of the brain, was actually operant in suppressing one's motivation. So that was clue number one. Clue number two is that there was a separate study that showed on fMRI that when somebody thinks they failed at something or they become risk averse, the habenula lights up. And so I kind of put, the chocolate and peanut butter together in that moment. And I was like, wow, like this is significant. And basically those were like two, pieces of the puzzle that then all of the intermittent puzzle pieces are now being filled in. So now the picture is much more fulsome. It's much more developed in terms of the habenula basically being the most powerful behavioral controller that has ever been found.
So how does one, now the habenula is impacted by trauma? What is
it has like a whole set of ins and out, inputs and outputs. So we can unpack that a bit. But, this is where the research is really hot, finding, every month is a new habenula finding. And so it's the picture is starting to get developed and it's actually quite complex.
So, okay. So what is your focus? What is your mission regarding this? Are you working? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So to me, the paradigm shift became, how do I deal with the failure being the tripwire in the habenula that then shuts down this motivation? So in the case of the youth, when they were incarcerated, they had, the Maslow's hierarchy, they had all their needs met, that kind of thing. The second they got on the streets, they felt like a failure compared to society, a lot of comparison thinking. And there was nothing there to manage their failure, their sense of failure from the past or even the current. If they're avoiding me knocking on the door, that's a failure moment too. Mm-hmm. And so all these habenula, I call them habenula hits, are significant. And clinically, that is where our focus should be. As clinicians, that's what we have to manage. Either we have to protect or put in prevention or prophylaxis on failure, because the failure is inevitable. It's not if, it's when. Mm-hmm. And it's often subconscious. And then the second aspect is, what is our recovery plan? What do we implant in that relationship as the client leaves the door, or the patient leaves the door, of like, and if this doesn't work, it's not your fault, protecting them and guarding them, and then having a callback mechanism. And then of course, there's a lot of, really great training about reframing that of course is very active in trauma-informed therapy and those kinds of things. So I think that to me, what I would like to do is dial up everybody's acute awareness of, and then, creativity in their therapeutic environment around failure management really and failure neutralization. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it brings what you just said shines a whole different light on the transition process. And I think talking about, young kids who are incarcerated is a great example, because obviously the contexts are so different, right? When you're talking to them in that environment, they're there, you're working with them in that environment, you serve as almost a different purpose than when they get out, they get home, they're crouching down. Yeah. So what do therapists need to know? How does this play into what they maybe could learn to do?
Yeah, I think that, what I would say as a self-critique in my career is that I went the direction of the mainstream in terms of performative approaches. And what I mean by that is goal setting and tracking against that goal and all of that stuff in order to make something doable and feasible. And so I was guilty of SMART goals and challenges and competitions in certain contexts and, being able to measure your progress, all those kinds of things. And I think that has pervaded the industry of healthcare and behavioral care at large. And so what I think that I now understand, excuse me, hold on a second. So I think what I now understand is that in the field that we are in, we are overusing performative approaches like that instead of iterative approaches, because iteration is the way around the habenula. Iterators never fail. If I set up the expectation in therapy, in therapeutic relationship, that We're here to iterate. All that matters is you finding what works for you. And when something doesn't work for you, you don't claim it as your own. It's just something, it's like a shirt you tried on in a store that you'll never think about again. So having that type of paradigm shift is really, really important as we approach this therapeutic environment in order to help people with this failure issue.
So iteration in terms of shifting, changing, right?
Yeah, like there's a lot of different categories of iteration, and this is something I'm unpacking in the book.
Okay.
So there's, what are your expectations? What are your what's the time of day that you're going to be doing these things? So there's different dials of behaviors that we can play with, and one of the sort of rigidities of CBT, for example, has been that it is so prescriptive. And same thing with habit design as another corollary in healthcare. These things that are like, the intention as well of, let's find something that you can do. But then if I make it so small that it's sort of dumb easy to do, but then you don't do it, guess what you do? You indict yourself. Mm-hmm. I can't even do one push-up. I can't even do one deep breath when I'm angry. I can't even, like the mind's tendency, especially in the anhedonic and depressive state and traumatized state, so much negativity bias towards the self that, the habenula is just kind of like this little jewel thief. It goes off. We don't feel it as a physical sensation. We don't see it because our prefrontal cortex just fills in and is like, you're the worst person on the planet. You're bad. And so that kind of stuff, knowing that needs to be designed before the person leaves the door, and also focusing them differently on, this is what works for you. Anything that matters is what works for you. And when it doesn't, it's not a failure. It's just move on, iterate. What did that teach you about what you needed? Well, I'm not somebody who likes to meditate in the morning. Okay, maybe I'll try it at night. Or maybe I'll try it with friends, or maybe I'll try it just on the weekends. Like there's all kinds of little ways that people can get creative with what works for them and get a tighter and tighter fit. And then the other thing that I think is not, as far as I know, not being communicated or discussed in the therapeutic environment is this is only temporary. That these habits, these strategies are with you for a reason, a season, or a lifetime, right? Very few marriages, and marriages that last, in terms of getting married to something that works for you, because we're evolving. That will change you just by doing it, right? So a practice, a CBT practice, or a particular understanding has a shelf life, and we just don't know what the shelf life expiration date is. But setting that expectation up of, hey, this will work for a while. We'll see. And we'll just, you and I will sit side by side and we'll kind of watch it, fall apart. And some of the signs are predictable, like you start to be a hypocrite. But when you see that hypocrisy, that's a natural state of the fraying of this habit in your life. Don't freak out.
Wow, fascinating. I can't wait to continue this. Really, we're speaking with Dr. Kyra Bobinet. I want to pause here for a second to thank our sponsors. So what I'm getting, Kyra, is with these iterative changes, in a sense, it's a paradigm shift. And it's almost as if, it sounds to me like you instead of constructing this solid, almost restrictive set of rules, prescriptive set of rules, you're creating opportunities for more wins, right? Okay, this didn't work, but this might, or this might, or this, giving an opportunity for more wins. To me, it sounds pretty exciting. So using that example, and I want to start talking about the book more specifically, but if we go back to that kid who's incarcerated, that image of him hiding behind the couch, whatever, to barely see you. How might you have applied this paradigm shift so that didn't happen for this kid?
Yeah. And that was the sort of, I learned to de-shame them ahead of time. Like I kind of sprayed them down with de-shame spray. I said, okay, look, like if you find yourself avoiding me, just try to lower the amount of time that you avoid me to then come back.
Wow.
because it's the part of you that doesn't feel confident. It's the part of you that doesn't feel good about yourself. Like, and let him play out and let him do his thing. But there's another part of you that's steering the ship, and that part of you is going to come back. So just implanting that callback, it's like if I have, I have a puppy, and just building that, we can't let her off leash because her breed just takes off. But building in that understanding and that sort of algorithm of, if this happens, then don't freak out, just come back as soon as possible, or do the littlest thing, text me, or whatever the case may be. And just being able to kind of understand what's going on in his brain that his abenula is on. My focus is how to reframe any failure that he's thinking about himself and give him the antidote to that in my communications.
I love it. I love it. All right. So let's talk about this book, The Well-Designed Life. Why did you write it?
I wrote it because I kept doing keynotes on human behavior and even the habenula, and everybody was saying, my audience was like, where can I learn more? And I was like, go to my next keynote. Like I didn't have anything. So it gave me a chance to really say, here are the most important things you should know about human behavior and the brain. And it's like a toolkit for all of that. So that's really what it was, by audience demand.
So people are listening to this thinking, okay, I have this I want to change, or that I want to change, or this I want to do better. Give us an example of how this might be applied.
Yeah. So if I want to change, this is something I'm working with right now. So this is completely raw material. I realized recently that I have a really long-standing relationship with the saboteur, let's say metaphorically, that I have always invited people in my inner circle who will cut me down, who will, cause me to doubt myself, who will, question me, who will, that kind of thing. And I'm reproducing that because my father was so hard on me. There was kind of like a, defiance that was built in me of like, no, I'm not. So when he would say, you're a loser, you're a failure, you will never amount to anything, there was a kind of paradoxical response in my being. So I deeply internalized this, and then have been recreating this through, I can name the names of the people who I have hired to do that job for me. And so now what I'm trying to do is break that habit. I'm trying to do something else in terms of, having more support in my world instead of the person who's cutting me down. And so I confronted the person who I have enlisted in that role. I told them what I'm working on. I am, actively setting boundaries with that person in terms of how they have treated me in the past. And then I'm also leaning into inviting and getting more habitual with supportive friends. I have an executive coach, those kinds of people, in order to flush my system of this old habit. So I think that to me, it's what is your ceremony and what's your ritual? Like ceremony is like the big aha, the retreat that you go to, or the sort of intensive, you go to rehab, whatever the case may be. Maybe you have an inpatient experience, and I don't mean ceremony in like a, it always has to be good. It can be quite unpleasant, but that depth of dismantling the current rhythm, like hitting the ground, or you choosing to disrupt yourself, then you have the chance for habit formation. So the software we built is all about habit formation. There's a certain way that happens in the brain. And the reason why habit formation is significant is that it's the only currency that the brain uses besides trauma to institute long-term change. It is the currency of long-term change in the brain, because unless you reach a state of mindlessness in what you're doing, when you brush your teeth, you're not thinking, okay, what do I do? You just do it, right? Mm-hmm. That level of automaticity and mindlessness is the holy grail for something that's going to be long-standing and sustainable. Everything else is temporary. Everything else is a practice. Everything else is an experiment or an iteration. Right. So there's these kind of like aha, significant emotional experiences, the ceremony, I'll call it a ceremony. And then there's the daily routine, the habit. How are you living day to day? How is that changing the way how you spend time, or how you think about your life, or any of those kinds of things?
It's interesting to hear you talk about the saboteur and the role that that's played in your life, because look, you're obviously very well accomplished and you're no slouch. So I'm thinking, my God, you have a saboteur, but in turn, do you feel like that is the reason you became so accomplished? I mean, come on.
I attribute it to, actually, if I could go there, a spiritual awakening that I had in my first year of medical school. Like, I think, I always had an interest in something greater than myself. And I was raised in a religion, but then I kind of went beyond that. Like, I just expanded to all curiosity, all, kind of, what is this world about? What is this higher power about? And it's different for each person. So, to keep it at the broadest level of kind of, the universe or the force or whatever the case may be, whatever somebody wants to use as a noun there. To me, it's following and surrendering to that mystery and to that curiosity that has really kept me going in the darkest of times. So the saboteur was a stubborn one. It was a stubborn lesson because it kept coming back in different forms. I was like, I thought I got you last time, and we all have those things that kind of emerge, like, I'm back, and so we're trying to deal with it humbly when it shows back up. But yeah, I don't think that there is a direct relationship between, like, when I got to UCSF for medical school, I remember looking around at my class and being like, oh, we all only have one thing in common because we were such a diverse class. I said, we all flog ourselves to do superhuman things. We all, berate ourselves inside of our heads, and push ourselves this. But I now believe that that's kind of like the dirty fuel, it doesn't have to be the fuel for accomplishment or, risk taking or, pushing your limits. It can be love. It can be, passion. It can be curiosity. Some of these things, it can be gratitude. So I've learned over time to switch from this very toxic fuel to something that is more sustainable, more healthy for my overall being. And the saboteur represents another thing that's transforming from, thank you, old friend. Thank you for pushing me beyond my limits. I'm now going to use love and passion and curiosity and connection, as my fuel.
That dichotomy, in a sense, makes a lot of sense to me, because it feels like a lot of us, in part, know about love, but it almost seems like we're so close to the trauma and this flogging, it almost seems like that's the low hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about, and again, not everyone does this, of course, but to utilize that healthier fuel, is that how do we get there? Is that such a conscious? It almost seems like it has to be an intention, a conscious choice. Because I can so identify with that.
Yeah, and I wonder if what we all have to go through is just different, what we call in cancer, like debriding. You're debriding the tumor, you're kind of making it smaller so that some of the other therapies can kind of take a crack at it, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's so large, there's no way to really get at it, to dismantle it. So I think it's a lifelong process, just full respect to that. And also, people can only deal with what they can deal with, like that. People are really, really intelligent. Everybody I've ever seen, no matter if they're educated or not, or they've had, the highest level of trauma or not, they have a sense of what they're willing to look at and work on next, Mm-hmm. And so the habenula is like the area of our brain that's like, it's the locus of aversion, everything you don't want to look at, everything you don't want to deal with, all that kind of stuff. But there's this little flicker inside of everybody of, can I, will I, should I, like that kind of thing. And that's where you blow on that flame and start to burn away some of the burden, the massive amounts of trauma that they're bringing to the table.
So The Well-Designed Life, who's the book for?
It's for people. I wrote it for other professionals, other clinicians primarily. What I find is that there's never a clinician who listens to this. There's always a human that listens to it and applies it to themselves. And, just like, in Buddhism, there's this adage where the Buddha, like, test it on yourself, try it on yourself, what I'm saying. And then, don't just believe me outright, just to see if this is true. And so that experimentation on self tends to happen with whomever reads the book. And so I find that people who are behavior changers, either DIY to themselves or they do it professionally, tend to really cherish the things in there because it helps to stimulate new thinking for them as well.
Awesome. All right, Kyra. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so you can reach me at FreshTry.com. You can also reach me on LinkedIn and also my personal website, drkyrabobinet.com. Always available to anybody who wants to have a further conversation.
Awesome. So inspiring. My God, love to have you back.
Thank you, Guy.
Just really appreciate you sharing about your story and just what you do, how you're helping people. I mean, that's what this is about.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're here. I want to thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the work you're doing as well.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care.